And joining us this morning on the Mama Morning Show is the Shadow Spokesman for Treasury in Western Australia and also the Shadow Spokesman for Aboriginal Affairs in Ben Wyatt. Good morning, Ben.
Morning, Barry.
Now, you've had a couple of very busy days in Geraldton, getting around and a lot of meeting and greeting, but yesterday with things like Mayoa, an opportunity to sit down and hear some problems from the people that are out there trying to deal with those. What's your impressions been so far?
It's been a great couple of days in Geraldton. Invited up here by Darren West, the member for Ag, based up here, and a very broad cross section of people and organisations I've met with, but had a very long meeting with the representatives of Mayoa, which was fantastic actually, because it actually gave me the opportunity to hear firsthand from the issues that are concerning or the challenges being faced by a number of different Aboriginal organisations. And they were diverse, as you'd expect, from a long conversation around housing and affordable housing and the lack of hostel in town, through to health issues, and many people listening will be familiar with health issues in respect of our Aboriginal community. And also one of the common themes, actually, whether Aboriginal organisations or commercial organisations, has been the issue around methamphetamines, ice. I must admit, the strongest message I've received on this trip has been the concern people have about the impact of ice on the community here in Geraldton.
And it's one of those things that it's going to need a total community effort.
Yeah.
Local government and state and federal governments to initiate that. What can you see as sort of a path to finding a solution there?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question and a tough answer. But what's clear is that, and I met with the city of Geraldton, is that everybody's kind of aware. Everyone knows there's a problem, but I sense sort of a great uncertainty about, okay, well, how do we, together come up with a sensible strategy here? Now, there are issues around, and I have this in my own electorate of Victoria Park, housing or lack of housing, homelessness and drug abuse often are related, which then feeds into mental health issues and broader health issues. So even in Perth, we're struggling to respond to the issues around ice. Ultimately, it just seems for me, from the anecdotal information I've received, is that it's perhaps a more entrenched issue here in Geraldton, and people are, it's having a bigger impact in a smaller community here in Geraldton than it seems to be elsewhere. So I think it's something that I'll be raising it with the opposition leader and also our police spokesman, our health spokesman, because I think it's not just a police issue and it's not just a health issue, but there's also issues of housing. And as unemployment increases, what worries me is that you'll see the use of methamphetamine increase.
Yes.
So, reducing unemployment isn't an easy response beyond trying to stimulate economic growth. So, how do you come up with an effective strategy around ice other than simply arresting and locking people up?
And it's one of those things that it's not just Geraldton, Carnarvon, Meekatharra, Mullawar, all of those places have got it, and it's just such an awful drug.
It is terrible drug, and we see it. There is advertising now on our TV. You see, which is quite dramatic, I think, and all across Western Australia, it is having a dramatic impact. And as I said, everybody has raised the issue of ice in my trip to Geraldton these last 2 days.
Now, also, we've got a situation with short-term accommodation and crisis care, as well as long-term accommodation and permanent accommodation that people would have been talking to you about. But it's particularly comes up with this short-term and crisis accommodation that there's just nowhere like that you can put people straight up. And so what sort of issues and who do government look to that if you were to get into government to satisfy that need? How do we plan that for the future, and how do we present that better to make it a priority?
Yeah, well, there does need to be crisis accommodation, short-term crisis accommodation here in Geraldton. I think that's clear. There has been, but it doesn't seem as though it's been effectively provided for in funding. Or the premises haven't been what we need to do it. As I said, it's the same issue in Perth. I have some short-term crisis accommodation, but never enough. Here there is none. and we're all familiar with domestic violence and mainly women and children escaping that domestic violence. So we do need crisis accommodation. There are a number of great NGOs, not-for-profit organisations that do this very thing, and I think government is best placed to look to some of those organisations. Now, government may in the end have to fund the capital works, build the hostel or renovate an existing building sufficiently. But my view would be the best way would be to hand the management over to someone who knows what they're doing with it. And I think it's been done in Perth, it's been done around Australia. I think that's probably the best model. But what is clear is that there just doesn't seem to be that space at all here in Geraldton, and whether it's people escaping domestic violence or people who may have been released from prison but don't have any accommodation options.
Yeah.
So both of which cause problems. If you've been released from prison but have no accommodation options, you're pretty certain probably on a path back into that jail.
Yep. The revolving door.
Yeah.
But also with short-term accommodation, that can come in the way of different hostels and different things for people who are under dialysis or medical things.
Mental health.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And so here with Geraldton being set up as a regional centre, there's more of those regional services that are being introduced and done. But the support services such as that short-term accommodation hasn't seemed to caught up with that yet.
And that's often the case. Government gets fixated on the big capital spend, building a new hospital or building this or building that, doesn't get so caught up in the support services that you need to make them work effectively. Now, Aboriginal people coming into Geraldton for medical services is exactly the same that's happening in Perth. And Perth, we can't provide the proper support service. This is in the middle of the CBD in the Perth city. So where we can, I mean, I've always been a firm believer in you push the service delivery closest to where the people live. So, but if necessary, that people come into Geraldton because this is a significant regional centre, then you need to have some form of facility so people can get that medical treatment, have a place to stay, and then hopefully return home afterwards. And this is something that, for some reason, in the city we don't get it right. When you go to Wellington Square, there are many people there who have come from all over Western Australia, don't have any accommodation facility while they're receiving medical treatment. And I think, I know there's some work going on with Roger Cook, the Shadow Health Minister, and I are working on some stuff at the moment around some better accommodation options for that. And I think clearly here in Geraldton, I think that demand is there and will probably only increase over time. So that's I guess another pickup, if you like, that I've got gained on this trip, and that is you can see where there's the short supply in support services to people accessing the facilities here in Gero, like health.
It seems to be that we can get hospitals built and we can do those things, but we seem to stop off at the customer care, which comes in at that.
But also,
that bottom end,
very important. That's. I mean, if people are coming in for dialysis, you need to have somewhere warm and safe to stay as well. So,
exactly.
Otherwise, it's just you're just going to get the people coming back in and causing. Then it flows on from that is your homelessness, social problems, and the other issues that people complain about.
And people who might be suffering ice episodes, you hear about them utilising the flying doctor and things like that because those mental health or drug care facilities aren't necessarily available in the regional centres. And it's such a big demand on governments of either persuasion, the health side of it. It's a big demand, isn't it?
Huge. Yep. It's a big chunk. It's a quarter of the budget basically goes into health. That is a huge spend each year, and so governments, Labor or Liberal, spend a lot of time trying to find savings or efficiencies in the health budget. My view is that in the long term we need to shift our focus more to preventative health, stop people in the very first instance getting ill, whether it be diabetes or whatever. The more we can shift into that end of the budget, the more you'll save over the longer term. But this is an issue that is playing out between the state and federal governments about exactly not only how we pay for health, but how we fund it into the future. And I'm telling you now, we have not yet solved that problem.
No. Now, and the other part of that problem between funding things seems to be tied up with education as well. There's a lot of money going into school attendance, particularly with Aboriginal students. Can you see a magic solution of how to keep kids engaged with school?
Well, I think the magic solution to anything, I think, is education. So the better, and all the statistics show that the more education you've had, the better results you get in health, in job opportunities, etc. So I'm a believer in education. So how do we get people into school? There are great programs around. Today I was at John Wilcock, had a look at the Shine program. I chair down in Perth Clontarf Aboriginal College, where the Clontarf Football Academy started. Yep. Now that has been very successful in getting boys into school and keeping them in school. There are a range of programs that work. Now what tends to be the way is they're generally funded in an ad hoc manner, a year here or a couple of years there. We need to commit to these programs over the life of, over a much longer lifetime, so that you get genuine results and people stay in school not just for 1 year in year 6, but actually stay in school all the way through to the end of year 12. And there are programs there. As I said, there's Shine. It's a great example of that I saw. So they're there. We just have to make sure that, okay, once we've captured the kids and they're in school, we can then teach them.
And it's also one of those things too where, from a community aspect, we have to reward achievers and not necessarily try and pull them down, which tends to happen sometimes in society today.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And we look, generally there's more and more pressure going on schools to solve all our problems, whether it be antisocial behaviour, kids on streets, etc. And you will actually get, if you can get kids into school and into an environment where it's interesting and they want to learn and they are learning, you'll get them back into school, but also you'll get them hopefully, if you can create an environment or provide an environment where homework can be done safely, then suddenly you'll get much longer term results in terms of social issues. I mean, calling the police and moving on people has a very short-term solution. Ultimately, those people continue to exist. So you have to say, okay, well, how do we make sure that people of Geraldton or Perth or Meekatharra or wherever have access to an education that provides genuine job opportunities at the end? And I think that's the simple reality. And there are great programs that get kids into school and keep them there. We just have to celebrate them and fund them.
And each really needs to be adaptable too, doesn't it, to the area? There's no one size fits all. Yeah. It's got to have that adjustment.
And that's what you've seen. I mean, I referred to the Clontarf Football Academy. Now that's obviously for boys, but that's been rolled out almost, not in every state, but nearly in every state in Australia. But of course, sort of responsive to the local school environment it finds itself in. So it can be done. It can be done, and I think we'll see the Shine program extended into other schools, and there'll be a lot of interest in how that goes. It's for a good program for girls. So I think people will watch that closely.
And there's been Follow the Dream too.
Follow the Dream, that's right. So there are programs that work and we know of. So in supporting and encouraging attendance, we know we can do. We just have to make sure that the school's there. Once the kids are there, the school environment is thriving enough to teach them.
So all the state governments hand out for more money all the time, and that's been a traditional thing. And at the same time looking at cutting expenditure themselves. What do you see as the solution of how the states can generate more income? Is it GST? Is it Medicare levies? Is it how do you see that situation coming where the states actually have a bit more money in the bank?
Yeah, it's tough because states actually don't have control over a lot of taxes. The vast majority of taxes and therefore revenues at the federal government level. States have a few taxes that broadly are inefficient. There's one or two that are efficient, that work well. Beyond raising them, there's not much a state government can do. And the federal government's looking at getting out of areas like health and education. They want to spend less in those spaces, and are demanding that the states pick up more of that responsibility. So at the moment there's a discussion taking place between the state and the federal government, but ultimately we're going to have to, in Western Australia, have a conversation around our tax mix and what it is, what taxes we have, the rate we have them, the base that they apply to. it's at some point we have to have that conversation in Western Australia, because that's exactly where the federal government's taking us.
And how do you take the politics out of that conversation?
Tough. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that yet. I don't have an answer, but I float this, or I talk about this issue a lot every chance I get, because people need to understand that at some point, it doesn't matter if it's Labor or Liberal, but at some point a government, because both the Labor Party and the Liberal Party is going to be faced with the same challenge of ever increasing demand for services, whether it be in health or education, and a revenue supply that may not be sufficient. And what we do know is that the debt levels of Western Australia are now high. We can't continue to borrow. So, okay, where do we find our revenue? And I've been saying that for a while now, that there will be, if you like, a reckoning where we have to make decisions on this.
And with those conversations that also need to happen, where do you see the conversation or the actions going with Aboriginals being recognised in the Constitution?
I think that'll get there. I mean, there's obviously, it has the potential to be fraught, but I do believe that it is a genuine bipartisan. I think there is support for recognition. Now, there does need to be, I hate saying the Aboriginal position, because I don't believe that there is ever such thing as the Aboriginal position on this, I think. But there does need to be, I think, recognition that it can't just be symbolic. It does need to actually deliver a significant change, not just acknowledging Aboriginal people. I watch the senior leadership in Noel Pearson and Pat Dodson and others have this conversation, and that's, I think, will be successful in the end. I'm just not sure in what form. At a state level, we will change our constitution, I dare say, in the coming month or two. The member for Kimberley, Josie Farah, her legislation to finally recognise Aboriginal people in our state constitution is likely to pass a parliament in the next couple of months. So at last, we'll be the last state to do it, but we'll get there.
Yep.
Quite
a while.
Will be, so it's taken us a while, but Josie Farah's bill will get it and deliver that, because I think everybody's going to support that. In terms of the federal constitution, there's still a fair bit of agreement that still needs to be reached before we can have an understanding of what that will mean.
Okay. Ben Wyatt, thank you for joining us today on the Mama Brekkie Show, and hope to catch up with you very soon.
Barry, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.